Welcome. You're watching Quest with me, Addiel Sabir, helping you understand how Pakistan connects to the region and beyond. Now, the 31st of August 2001 will be forever etched in the annals of history, much like September the 11th, 2001. Why is it so significant? Well, of course, yesterday we saw the last of the US troops leave Afghanistan after a 20-year-long war. The Taliban have swept into power and leaving a lot of uncertainty regarding the future of Afghanistan, regarding the future of its people, and of course its neighbours. What for Pakistan? What for the region at large? Now, yesterday Joe Biden took an address to the nation, the American people, to explain the withdrawal, and he defended it quite vehemently. He went on to say that the date, the 31st of August, in fact, was not an arbitrary deadline, and it was designed to save American lives. He went on to say that he did not want to extend what he described as a forever war, nor a forever exit for that matter. Yet he has put the blame clearly of the debacle seen during the evacuation process, which began on August the 14th at the door of the Afghan government, which has now been overthrown, and he has also put the blame on his predecessor, President Trump. Now, most of this conversation has taken place post the withdrawal, has significantly focused on not just the uncertainty, but the nature of which the chaotic withdrawal was described as a deadly withdrawal, not forgetting some 13 American soldiers were killed in a suicide attack at one of the airbase points back in mid-August. So we will be discussing how Joe Biden's address to the nation has been received, not only in America but also worldwide, and also how fissures, it seems, are appearing following a statement by the EU policy chief saying that this was now a wake-up call for the organisation, saying that it now needs to build on its own strategic capabilities. So we'll be examining the relationship between the EU, NATO, and of course the United States post their withdrawal. Now, to help us discuss various different elements of the ramifications of the US withdrawal, we have with us journalist Moyed Jafri with us, who joins us from Lahore. Thank you for joining us. Zunaira Azhar, who in fact joins us also, who's a political analyst, and Air Commodore Iftikhar Bajwa Sahab, who is a defence analyst. Thank you, panel, for joining me today on the programme. Let me go over to Mr. Jafri first, just to get an overview. Of course, probably about 24 hours since the last the American soldiers have left Afghan soil, and we've seen signs of jubilation, pictures coming out from Kabul airport from across Afghanistan, welcoming the Taliban takeover. Just a quick overview from you as to your take on how you've seen this rather what was described as a hasty withdrawal, even though it was well documented.
Yes, it was hasty, and not just that. When they set out and laid down the plan of this exit from Afghanistan, they specifically kept on using these two words of this exit being orderly and being organized. So what basically we need to, even if we try to set the standards set by Washington itself, it was anything but orderly, because we saw how the Bagram Air Base was vacated overnight without informing anyone. We saw how the situation at Kabul airport became chaotic because of majorly lack of communication between the Afghan government at that point of time, which was in place in Kabul at that point of time. The Taliban had not taken over. And as reports have now come to the fore, CNN is now reporting that the Taliban and the US, Washington, had basically brokered a secret deal in which the US government was basically Taliban's help in escorting and evacuating their personnel and the people that they wanted to get out of Afghanistan. Now, with all these things in mind, we have in the address that Joe Biden did recently, yesterday, he was basically on the back foot. If the tone of that entire speech is analyzed when it comes to the gestures and language, it was mostly defensive, in which he was basically trying to explain to the world and people. Because if you monitor the media coverage of this entire episode in the United States, especially, it's very damaging to Biden's presidency and the Democrats as a whole. And there are rising voices among Democrats, which are basically not at all happy with the way all of this was carried out, the disrepute it brought to America, and the way the world is viewing it, as you mentioned it yourself, that the EU too is basically now pointing fingers, and it's kind of because victory has many fathers and defeat is an orphan, as we all know. So I believe that by any stretch of the imagination, this was not an orderly and organized exit.
Indeed. Let me just cross over now to Air Commodore Iftikhar Bajwa. I just want to get your take on particularly some of the remarks made by Joe Biden. I mean, he made quite a fierce defense, to be honest. I mean, but he has, in fact, fulfilled on one of his main campaign promises, which was to bring the US troops back. And he has, despite his military advisors, has stuck to his guns, albeit he has perhaps upset the allies, and particularly the EU, as we've seen. But I just want to just come to this point which was touched on by Jafri Saab, regarding there seems to be some sort of collusion or some coordination, at least covert, you can call it, between the Americans and, of course, the Afghan Taliban regarding the withdrawal. So, as put, do you think it was as orderly or disorderly as it's been described? If there was, in fact, well, we saw that there was a safe passage which was granted to these the American troops.
I will try and talk on the subject. Am I audible to you?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I will just try and cover the military aspect of the whole thing. When it comes to making a deal, there are speculations. People are actually drawing different inferences out of deal, whether it was a deal or whether it was a settlement or whatever. But when it comes to military point of view, the withdrawal, I would say that generally speaking, it was reasonably orderly. Such incidents or accidents, or some of them, they were likely to take place. It is just because of the media that things become too evident and too clear to the people. Otherwise, if this blast had not taken place where 13 American troops died during the withdrawal, it would have been actually very smooth and orderly. Such a chaotic situation, I think, when it comes to American forces withdrawal, what everybody calculated it incorrectly and wrong was that they were expecting that before the drawdown of American forces from Afghanistan, or during that time, they were reasonably assured that the local forces of Afghanistan, they will be able to hold at least till the departure of American forces. That did not happen. Somehow, they collapsed much earlier than any analyst in the world expected or anybody could guess. So when that collapsed, the chaotic situation arose because of their local forces not giving a fight to Taliban. So besides that, I would say that Taliban, to a great extent, kept what they said and kept their commitment, and they did not try to create a difficult situation. It was ISIS who did, and they were penalized accordingly. I think as a whole, I would say that with military point of view, this military drawdown was reasonably okay, acceptable, if not very smooth.
Question to you, Mr. Jafri. I mean, there are reports or suggestions that perhaps the Afghan army or the security forces had been compromised by the Afghan Taliban. Even there are suggestions that they had been bought in many ways. Would you agree with any of those assertions?
What basically, what I would base my opinion on was what was coming out as information from both ends. That was sources, our sources, and reporter in Kabul, and what the Taliban were basically saying, and video evidence of that. What was basically happening, and now we know it for a fact. If you go through the reports by Sigar and Yunama over the past 5-6 years, and also most importantly, Reuters has recently, in fact, I believe just a couple of days ago, on the 29th, they released the transcript of the last conversation, telephonic conversation between President Biden and President Ashraf Ghani. And it is very revealing because Ashraf is talking about how for the past 5-6 years, the pays and the salaries of the Afghan forces were not raised, which was why he was basically arguing that there was not enough motivation among the Afghan forces. And Biden was pursue him and push him about the fact about like 300,000 Afghans in Afghanistan, and why exactly is it not that the Taliban are being held off? So this combined with the fact that the Taliban said and issued video evidence, Zabiullah Mujahid, Qari Ahmadi, and Dr. Naeem Wardak, all three of them issued videos showing how the Afghan forces were not, once the Taliban had them surrounded or had them at any disadvantage, they were not willing to fight from the corner. They just gave up. They were like, thank you very much. We don't want to risk our lives for this anymore if you let us go back to our houses. And that's what basically happened. So all this talk of the army being bought or being coerced or some kind of a deal, I think it's, in my opinion, based on what we've seen in the media and shared by both sides. It is more a case of lack of motivation and the disconnect between the Kabul bubble that was created and the people and the forces that they thought they had in the rest of the country. So because of that, the forces and statistics also show that every year around 25% of total recruitment of the Afghan army, they just completely left. So if they were hiring 100 soldiers every year, 25 were leaving within the first month. So the numbers in the books were not equal to the numbers that were being told to the United States of America, which is why Biden keeps on mentioning that he cannot wrap his head around the fact, how can a $10 billion equipped army of 300 men, 80,000 or 80,000 Taliban? So basically, it was more a result of the corruption, mismanagement, and disconnect between the Ashraf Ghani government and the armed forces that led to the situation where the Kabul forces and the Taliban did not have the kind of war and resistance that should have come from the Kabul forces that Biden and the rest of the world expected, which led to the, saying it was sooner than expected would be an understatement, but like surprisingly and staggeringly a fast capture of Kabul.
Well, let's get some kind of like a military or defence perspective on it. Comrade Bajwa, your take on the fact that you've got 300,000 trained Afghan army soldiers up against, well, we don't know exactly the number of the Afghan Taliban present. One assumes billions of dollars spent on their training, on their recruitment, on providing them with all of the hardware which was needed to protect themselves. Are you surprised in any way that they capitulated so quickly, or do you agree with our analyst who's joining us that said it was more a lack of motivation rather than perhaps them being bribed or perhaps coerced in a different way?
I would tend to agree with what he has said. It was actually troops on ground of the Afghanistan Defense Forces. There were not as many as we've been hearing. Practically, there are suggestive reports that there were 60 to 70,000 people actively on ground, and the rest was all in papers. What exactly is the situation? It is not very clear to say. But what happened, the reports suggest that this was the type of a situation. One. Secondly, 25% of your force deserting in the first month or first year of service, actually this type of a force cannot be declared as a proper military force. I think they were trying to keep them motivated through whatever emoluments or pays they were given. And so far as one thing is concerned, that they were not able to fight. More than that, they were not ready to fight. Because for fight, the first thing which comes to a soldier is the conviction, that motivation to fight. I think the Afghan forces on ground lacked that. And now when Taliban have taken over, I would rather say that they made a better choice by not giving a fight, instead surrendering or making a compromise with their local people of whatever category they were Talibans or anybody else. Had it been a different situation, say 300,000 people and their families, if they had given a good fight, where would they go? Now at least they are in better terms with the local Taliban, that they can at least settle, and they have announced an immunity also for them. I think end of the day, I would say that they made a wise choice by not giving Taliban a fight, instead made a compromise. But I would say, very strongly say, that that force which was created by the foreign funding and foreign trainers was not ready to fight, and they did not have the requisite amount of conviction to fight.
Okay, let me just quickly now cross over to our other guest who now joins us. Sunera, can you hear us?
Yeah, much better.
Hi, thank you. Well, we were just discussing, of course, the state of the Afghan army, and we're talking about the capitulation or the surrender, if one can call it that, or the unconditional surrender. And both of our other guests are of the opinion that perhaps it was a lack of motivation. It was a compromise best served for their own needs, because they wouldn't have had anywhere to go had them and their families been involved in what would have been effectively a civil war of sorts. Would you agree to the assertion that it was a lack of commitment, there was a lack of desire, if you may, to go through another set of circumstances after just a prolonged war of 20 years?
Well, I think there are many dimensions to this question. One is, militarily speaking, the way that army was raised. Within 2 years, 4 years, 5 years, you can't generate a leadership. And you cannot simply inculcate certain level of motivation and ideology against your own people. It's like you are fighting an army, you are having a hands-on training of the modules and the fight at the same time, which is not possible. Those people were fighting their own people. So it gives a lot of conviction to do that. And I don't know what kind of training modules were followed that in the end it ended in such a disdain. Two, the leadership qualities that a general usually receives within a span of 30 years, where would that leadership come from? And how do you motivate the young soldiers? So the training that was done in UK, US, and India, it was mainly focused on how to arm or disarm an ammunition. It was not about the maneuvers, the military maneuvers, which are mainly involved in a war. Moreover, the training regime itself was very questionable. There were simulation villages made over there. There were mock villages made over there. The terrain was developed over there. But you are trying to train the people who actually belong to that area, and you are trying to inculcate the module which actually belong to the Western world. That was a bad combination. So there are more than one angle involved to this military defeat of the Afghan army. And I don't blame those people at all. The whole idea was flawed from the beginning at the policy level.
I just want to get your take quickly, Sunera, on before you join us. We were discussing what was being described as perhaps an ill-planned and chaotic withdrawal. On the one side, and we're now hearing reports coming from US news agencies that perhaps there was some kind of collusion as well with the Afghan Taliban. They'd provided a safe passage. There were these little cluster points which were set up, and over the course of the 2 weeks which followed, the Taliban were pretty much in cahoots with getting the Americans out safely, and all this in the backdrop of course, that deadly attack which took place, which claimed the lives of 13 people claimed by ISIS. So do you believe it was orderly or as disorderly as been described by the Biden opponents in America?
Well, orderly or disorderly is not the question here. I think the decision was hasty. If you go back to 2011, that was the first point of time in the entire war on terror that it was decided that the US is going to pull out. And the same month, they sent over another 4,000 soldiers, which was a surge. So how can you announce a withdrawal and surge at the same time? One. So since 2011, it was a kind of rift between Pentagon and White House, whether to pull out or not. So the flip-flop that was happening between the American bureaucracy itself is responsible for that. And that chaos that we witnessed on the Afghan soil is the outcome of that. Whether it was orderly or it was not orderly, in both cases, it was a mess. And Joe Biden didn't want to focus more on Afghanistan because obviously the strategic contours have changed. The new powers are emerging and the China trade war is more important to them now. What is happening in South China Sea is more important to them now. So they couldn't care less. So they just wanted to get out. And this is only a discussion for you and me probably, or the Afghan people. They're not even bothered about that over there. I know certain people who are not even ready to answer this because this is a clear defeat. And once you are defeated, this is how you simply lose. This is how you go. The other point is that there is this pressure on Biden that if you want to contain Afghanistan in a way that China is not able to have the influence that it wants to have, why did you leave? The thing is, whether you leave or not, the destabilizing agent that you are leaving behind is going to still work in favor of US. The reason why the whole world wants Taliban to succeed is because only a stable Afghanistan would help in this region to develop further. On the other hand, US is hell-bent upon it, I would say, to keep the region destabilized, and that is the only way to keep China at bay. So it is just a matter of our discussion, whether it was orderly or not orderly. They are not bothered about it.
Very interesting point there. But of course, in the same light, we heard Joe Biden saying that this is the end of U.S. nation building. And of course, this 20-year-long protracted war has been doomed by many. The naysayers have been saying that this is just one war which cannot be won by the US. And as Biden has said himself, this is the end to US nation building. There was no clear purpose to this open-ended mission, and that's why it was necessary for him to bring the troops back. But in doing so, it seems to have upset his allies. The EU, particularly, has come out and said this was a wake-up call. So we'll be discussing the relationship or the developing relationship from here on in between the United States and the EU, and what will happen to the allies. Will they, as the policy chief said, they come together and have their own strategic capabilities now need to be enhanced? We'll discuss that in a little bit more after the short break. Do stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Quest with me, Addiel Sabir. We were discussing the latest monumental, in fact, US withdrawal from Afghanistan and its repercussions. I just want to quickly, before we move on to how the relationship between the US and EU and its allies will be following this rather abrupt withdrawal, just want to quickly come back to our guest. Mr. Jaffrey, just very, very quickly, if you could just give me your overview in a few sentences, perhaps. Do you think that the US objectives have been achieved that were set out by President Bush and then successive American presidents? I mean, principally, they wanted Osama bin Laden and they wanted to dismantle Al-Qaeda. Okay, we know about what the fate of bin Laden was, but in your opinion, has Al-Qaeda been dismantled?
Al-Qaeda,
with me?
Yeah, Mr. Jaffrey, yeah.
It's a very important question because U.S. objectives when it comes to Afghanistan have been shifting and changing, and there's been a lot of flip-flopping, which if you look at Biden's last address They started off, like you pointed out, dismantling Al-Qaeda and taking away or holding Osama bin Laden accountable for what they thought was his role in the 9/11. But when it comes to Al-Qaeda, yes, to a certain degree, they have dismantled Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. But like Biden continues to point out how it is growing and how its affiliates like Boko Haram and Al-Shabaab in other parts of the world, they are now gaining strength. And we see in Niger and in Nigeria how things are going from bad to worse and even beyond. So that part, yes, in Afghanistan may be true. But overall, if we talk about that, it might not be fair to say the U.S. has been able to dismantle Al-Qaeda as a whole. That's point number one. Number two, very quickly, we need to understand how the U.S. objectives, like I pointed out earlier, have been shifting and changing. They started off with Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden. Then they got on to how the brutal regime of Taliban needs to be dismantled. Then they got on to nation building, which we'll get on once we get into the part where we talk about EU and the US. And then eventually how the entire regime change and the seeds of democracy narrative of the United States came into play. So all these things over time were set out as objectives. And in my humble opinion, other than the fact that, yes, they did eventually get Osama bin Laden, and they were to a certain extent, to be fair, to a large extent, dismantle Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, none of the other objectives that they've been, adding to their list of to do things in Afghanistan have been achieved at any level. And even in this particular speech, Biden very clearly admitted that they were wrong because they did not understand how the cultural and societal values and structures and nomenclature of Afghanistan worked, and how it was virtually impossible to complete a nation-building mission the way they wanted to. So the Al-Qaeda part, yes, but the rest of the objectives that they set out for themselves, no.
And the same question to you, Commodore Bajwa, from your perspective, leaving a horrible blueprint behind the Americans, but this objective of dismantling Al-Qaeda, which to a certain degree, over the years we've seen mostly being, if there were mostly any operations carried out, they were mostly lone wolves, or lone wolf as they describe it. So operationally perhaps not as strong as it used to be, obviously once the occupation had gotten underway. But following the demise, or rather the taking out, if you will, of Osama bin Laden, do you believe that the leadership still exists and holds a strong network within Afghanistan, or do you believe now that they have moved elsewhere slowly?
First thing is that I would say that Joe Biden had been very unlucky that he entered into this fiasco at a stage where strategic blunders, they were done earlier. He entered only during this strategic thing, and he's facing I would say, the biggest reaction on that. While they entered, as per the very bookish definition of what the war is the achievement or not otherwise of the objective. US came to Afghanistan with the objective to dismantle Al-Qaeda, and they appear to have done that, and against Osama bin Laden. So according to the book, yes, they achieved their objective, but they achieved their objective way back. So far as Al-Qaeda exists or not, I think Al-Qaeda does not exist the way it used to exist. They have fizzled out, and they have joined, say, other organizations, or they have shifted their base from Afghanistan to Niger or some other country. I'm not very sure where it is. But however, there are no sounds of Al-Qaeda being visible or being traced in Afghanistan. So only if we talk of Afghanistan, I would say that, yes, Americans, they were able to eliminate Al-Qaeda from Afghanistan.
And in doing so, they have made way or given space to another multi-headed monster known by the name of ISIS. Bringing in Zunaira Azhar, your take. They seem to have found a way of compromising a little vacuum and finding a way to make themselves be known ISIS. And do you believe now that the problem that the Americans may face will be, or even the Afghan Taliban for that matter, may face is that the presence of ISIS now in this region, given how Al-Qaeda has been somewhat, as they say, dismantled?
Well, it is easier to comment on an all-out war What I mean is if it is between two countries, a formal and a more direct war. The war between a coalition of countries and a militia force later on after 9/11 became an amalgamation of so many militia forces because on the ground, we all know that Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and Taliban were fighting together because the enemy was common and their ideology was jihad. So that was all very much enough for them to be working together against the common enemy. The problem is not whether they have dismantled Al-Qaeda or not. The problem is whether they have curbed the menace of terrorism or not. And according to State Department itself, they have failed to do so. General Petraeus, who has served for a very long time in Afghanistan, he himself is saying that the counterterrorism techniques have failed miserably. And he says that the risks have evolved. So when he says the risks has evolved and they have grown as well, me and you can very well understand that it was difficult to fight one militant group in Afghanistan. And for the years to come, if there is an amalgamation, there is a consolidated effort getting harbored in Afghanistan now, the security risks have certainly increased. So Taliban are trying to act very formal, sort of a body now, a very political kind of an entity now, because they do not want to fight a war anymore. But ever since the Doha Agreement has taken place, ISIS has been saying that you have abandoned the holy cause of jihad and you have joined hands with the forces we were fighting against. So now there is further chaos coming. I can see that, and that is even said at the various counterterrorism committees in US as well, that it has evolved 100 times. So I don't know whether it's fair to say that they have been successful in dismantling Al-Qaeda. The problem has grown into tenfolds, I would say.
Very much a double-edged sword. I mean, as we've the presence of ISIS, I mean, almost 10 years ago, you wouldn't have heard perhaps the name ISIS in this particular region. Coming to Commodore Bajwa, we're well aware of the message which was given out by George W. Bush. And of course, the message was, you know, you're with us or you're not with us. And they were set out to eliminate Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda, it seems, now diminished somewhat. But their allies and the NATO, the troops which were assisting them in Afghanistan, their fight wasn't really as much as the Americans. And today we've seen a stark message being given by the EU policy chief that this was a wake-up call, effectively, for the organization, for the US allies, and that they had gone in, but they did not, Washington did not consult them on the way out. And now the issue is, of course, you've got the Kabul airport, which is ineffectively not operating any kind of flights. So they have a number of their peoples in various different embassies who are now stuck. So how do you see this particular call out by the EU policy chief, A? And B, how do you see the relationship panning out from here between the US and its allies?
I would say that it was basically a war of America, and they pulled other countries into their war. And when you pull another country or you coerce another country to do what your so-called friendly country or a strategic partner wants you to do with force, so that amount of conviction, that lacks. Pakistan was also like pushed to a corner to be with them or against them. So I think that that real essence of coalition was missing. Participation by other EU country was mostly, I would say, symbolic, or any other countries or NATO partners. It was mostly symbolic. They did not want to be there wholeheartedly. It was only Americans who wanted to be there. And when everybody is gauging and analyzing that it hasn't ended into a success, I mean, we may say that according to book, yes, they have achieved their objective. We as analysts are very certain that declared objective was not their objective. Their objective was somewhere else. And we don't want to discuss about that at this forum, but whether they achieved their objective or not. But there's a general buzzword that they have failed. When it comes to a failure, then naturally all the allies, they like to put the whole weight to the party who pushed them into that war. And I think this reaction by EU or any other partner is reasonably likely. This type of a reaction would come. I mean, even Pakistan and the majority of people in Pakistan are rejoicing what has happened to America in Afghanistan, regardless of what is likely to or what is going to happen to us tomorrow. We are, I mean, appreciating, our majority of Pakistanis are appreciating. So this type of a situation, when circumstances are like this, I think this reaction is reasonably likely, the type of reaction EU has given.
Coming over to Ms. Zunera, I mean, it must have come as an awful surprise, I suppose, to the EU and the allies of the Americans, that almost in an unplanned way, they had decided to get their own people out and they'd left various other nationals stranded. I mean, this must be really, really concerning now, of course, for those particular embassies who have their nationals there who cannot get them out. I mean, do you think that this will have a far-reaching effect on the strained relationship, perhaps, which is now showing sort of like fissures and cracks because the word fail is being used? They don't want to be associated with fail, and also they feel let down by the fact that they weren't consulted and Washington took this decision unilaterally.
Well, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that the whole effort of war on terror was based on Security Council's Resolution 1373. And if the report on the website of State Department is not taken down yet, you'll see the first 100 days, they say that 80 countries were directly hit by the attacks on 9/11, and those 80 countries plus other collective people who think that it was an attack on the heart and soul of the freedom and civilized part of the world should participate in this war. Based on this narrative, that Security Council resolution was passed. 80 countries were signatories to it. And based on that very resolution, NATO joined hands with US to go into this war. So when there is a collective responsibility being taken, military aid, political aid has been there, then the failure also has to be collective. I don't think so that EU can be exonerated from this fact that they were also present in Afghanistan as much as Americans were there. And now just because they have failed, they want to get that clean sheet that you and I are not in the position to give them. So they would try and come out with some excuses in the future, which UK has already done in the form of Brexit. I was very much there when the whole Brexit fiasco was happening. And the whole idea was actually evolving around the defense budget that was going into the war on terror and this NATO alliance. And Britain thought that we better get out of this mess. So it is only, it was just tip of the iceberg, the Brexit, I mean. So the allies, they are going to separate their ways slowly. NATO is going to collapse because it has failed and it has collectively become ineffective. Also at the policy level, they have been following the lead of the US. They were never consulted on the major decision making. So yes, I see a bleak future, whether it is wise for EU members to follow and take the lead of the US in the future course or not. Yes, I see that happening.
And just a quick wrap now from the, of course, just touching on this withdrawal and one of the most harshest realities of war that we often hear about but is not documented as much, is not discussed as much, as war crimes. Now we've heard of many atrocious things happening at the Bagram air base, Guantanamo Bay, another one which has probably disappeared off everybody's radar. Coming back to war crimes, do you think, very quickly panel, I just want to give you a couple of sentences each. Coming to you, Mr. Jafri first, war crimes, do you think now that the EU will also be culpable for any war crimes which are brought to light as have in the past? Do you think they will be accountable as well, the EU countries, or not perhaps?
it's a very important question. Before I answer that, I need to point one thing very clearly out: that the Taliban have never fought side by side with ISIS. They've always held a very strong opinion against them, and they've always disavowed them. Now, getting back to the question that you were asking, it's kind of an attitude by the Western countries, including the US and the European Union, where they create all this mess, they violate human rights, and commit war crimes. Australia, as we all saw, the bigger example, where they admitted and confessed to it. And then they just say, oops, sorry, we did it. And they get along with life, and they're not held accountable. When it comes to the European Union now pointing fingers at the United States, it's rather ironic, because all of these countries, they went willingly into this. And when it comes to consultation, the recent G7 meeting was held, in which all of these factors. So now that the world is, not viewing all of this in very positive light, it's very easy to throw the US under the bus and exonerate oneself from all the war crimes. Even there are reports, there are inquiries in the International Criminal Court regarding war crimes committed by British soldiers. And when I talked to the British ambassador in Pakistan a couple of times during this occupation, he was very clear in saying that the UK has its own objectives when it comes to Afghanistan. And it does not necessarily share exactly what the US or the Pentagon would want them to do. So now that the world is viewing this as embarrassing defeat, it's very easy to dump the load, all of it, on the United States and say, well, we were basically fooled by the United States and all that. That's cute, but that's not how the real world
And final word from you.
And most important part.
Sorry for interrupting you there, Mr. Jaffrey. We're just running very short on time. Quickly, Mr. Bajwa, your take. Do you believe that perhaps the EU and other countries will try to exonerate themselves in many ways for any war crimes which may or may not come to surface?
In my opinion, I think the case or the fiasco or whatever we call it, a failure, is very fresh. And all European countries, they are democratic countries, they are under that amount of pressure from their public that they sort of injected so much of funds to support a war, which was not actually mainly theirs. So such statements could also be like, there could be an eyewash sort of a thing, just to settle the dust for a while. Like I would try and substantiate the fact with the fact that what happened to this Iraq's weapon of mass destruction? I mean, everybody acknowledged there were none. What happened? Nothing happened. So this may be just a statement to pass this time. I personally doubt that NATO would ever get dissolved or disappear, because they have far different and far bigger objectives. And these objectives are not against anyone else. They are about a specific faction in this world. So as long as that faction does not come to their terms, which there is no likelihood, I don't think there would be any chance of NATO getting eliminated the way we expect it to. So I would say that when it comes to war crimes, they may do something to just, again, for an eyewash, to show to the world that, well, they did something, if at all they do. I personally doubt that they would do, because then they would have that amount of pressure from their own military forces that the guys they fought, and then they are being tried or they're being exposed to such things. I don't think there would be anything significant so far as this war crime or its proceedings are concerned.
And closing comments from you, Zanella, your take on whether or not this is eyewash, passing the buck, what you may, or people may have fickle memories, and somewhere down the line we'll all forget about some of the atrocities which have been carried out by the occupational forces. Do you agree with that? This may just wash away with time?
Well, we have seen Obama going to Japan and saying we are sorry for what we did, knowing that it was the worst of the human catastrophe that ever happened. We have seen Srebrenica massacre, people saying sorry to each other, and that's it. They move on. We have seen what is happening in Guantanamo Bay, and as long as it is not at the very best, what I see is that probably maybe a few countries would say sorry to their own nations, and they will just show how they want to undo these things, and that situation was out of hands, blah, blah, blah. So maybe at national level, some countries and countrymen might do that. But as a collective order, in the world order, there is nothing like that, because who will cast the first stone? Everybody was involved in this bloodshed.
Absolutely. I'd like to thank my guests once again. Zunaida Azhar, who's been joining us, Moyed Jafri from Lahore, and Air Commodore Iftikhar Bajwa. Final closing thought. Of course, Operation Enduring Freedom was the name given to the invasion of Afghanistan, and yet we see 20 years, after 20 years, some $3 trillion, thousands and thousands of lives lost. For what? That is the question. Is Afghanistan any better off today than it was back in 2001? Only time will tell. Join me for another episode of Quest soon. I'm your host, Addiel Sabir. Thanks for watching.